How to Query an Attribute Value by Sarah Smith-Tripp. In this video, you will learn how to query a value from an attribute table and how to use SQL. To complete this video, you will need shapefile data, access to ArcGIS Pro, and a Windows 10 computer. There are three methods of select and query attributes. The first is to select the layer by its attributes. The second is to build definition queries on layers or standalone tables. And the third is to filter what you display on the layer itself in the Symbology. We'll go through each of these independently. First, let's look at select layer by attributes. Using select layer by attributes. So you can see on this video that I've loaded my shapefile data, and now I'm going to go and select a layer by attributes. There are two ways to do this. The first is to right-click, open the attribute table, go to the Table tab, and you'll see under the selection that you can select by attributes. Here I can then define my input rows, and then I'm going to say New Selection. I'm going to add a clause where I can choose what I want to split by, like province name, and I can say is not equal to, and let's say Ontario. I then add that clause and click Run. You can see that I've now selected all provinces that are not Ontario. We can go ahead and delete this selection. We can also find this tool by going to the geoprocessing window and typing select layer by attribute. You'll see that it shows up again. Now, when we define our input rows, we have to select our shapefile, say New Selection, and say Add a clause. Let's again use province name, and let's say ends with O. And we click Run, and that gives us Ontario. Similar to the select layer by attributes, we can also use a definition query to define the attributes that we would like to see on our map. There are two places to find the definition query. In the first place, we can go to Feature Layer, Data, and click Definition Query. This brings us to a layer properties where we can define a new definition query. We can also right-click on the shapefile and click Properties. This also brings us to the definition query. We can define our new definition either using clause or SQL. Now this is also present on the select layer by attributes. The clauses are generally easier to use unless you know SQL language. But here we can define something like our field ID is equal to 12. And then we can add another clause where we can say and or. We can say or because our field ID is unique to each value in this. And we can say province name begins with N. Say add and apply. Click OK. And now we'll see that we've selected all of the provinces that start with N and the field ID that starts with 12. And this goes into our select layer by attributes. But you'll see rather than just selecting, it also defines what we're seeing on the map itself. SQL is equal to clauses, but is in text form. So here we have two clauses where we said where field ID is equal to 12 or province name begins with N. And if we look at the SQL query, we can see that we've defined our first clause, field ID, equal to 12. And then we've defined or, where we're saying, well, okay, we want the field ID to be equal to 12, Or we could also accept our second clause, province name, where in is the first value followed by a % sign. So in this we've defined n is what we want the thing to start with, but we don't care what happens afterwards. Now that's just a short introduction to what SQL is doing, but you can know that clauses and SQL values are equal in what they are able to do. A final way that we can define what features we would like to see on a map is to build it into our Symbology. Now I've added here another shapefile, which is looking at the major cities of Western Canada. For this, we can go to Symbology, and then we can click this display filters, which you might have to bring up on your ArcGIS, and say enable. Then we can add a display filter, and then we can add a clause. And let's say I know that this PPLTNRNG is the population scaled. So I can say is greater than, let's say, 4. And then you'll see that we have much fewer cities displayed with this shapefile. Next up in our series, we have how to manage and modify attribute values. Thank you for watching, and feel free to ask any questions by contacting our office following the links below.